Welcome to this week's episode of Hired. I have a very special guest joining us today from the northern suburb of Toronto, also known as Barrie. And for those of you that don't know, Brian is coming out. He's my co-founder and partner of Spark. And what a lot of people don't know is Brian and I actually grew up together. And this isn't our first partnership. Our first partnership actually took place in grade 10 French class. And that was really a collaboration on a masterpiece, if I'm going to say, on one of the greatest presentations that I've seen that actually led to us not taking French anymore after grade 10. We were advised that maybe it wasn't the best avenue for us. And then we got into recruiting. So without further ado, I want to welcome to the show Mr. Brian Gregory Edghill. Brian, what's
Thanks,
up?
Mike. How's it going?
How's that?
You know what? I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, am I going to get one of these special Mike Thompson intros? I was like, I don't think I'm special enough for that. So I appreciate it.
I was thinking, I was like, this isn't the first time we've worked together. And it's certainly like, because we have a history, I was like, when was the first time we actually worked together on something? And I think like, that's the first thing that came out. And maybe just because it was a real bad
It stands
project.
out.
It stands out as one. I think we've gotten better at it since then. But the other thing that's unique is like professionally, I've only ever worked with you. Like we started together at Veritech. And for those people that don't know, it's actually Brian for getting me into the recruitment industry. So I was, we went to high school together. Brian went to Western. I did a couple victory laps. And then I went to Laurier. And by the time I got out of school, Brian had already been working in the industry. And I'd reached out to him on LinkedIn with kind of like a, hey, man, didn't know you were in HR. Like, what's that like? And he responded right away because those of you that know Brian, his response rate is extremely fast. And was like, no, it's not technically HR. It's much more sales. And he's like, we're actually hiring. You should meet up for a beer and have a chat. And I guess the rest is history.
The internal recruit. Yeah. I mean, I guess that was the first recruit. Kudos to you for reaching out and being an aggressive candidate.
Well, and it's funny because I was thinking about this, like as we're having this conversation, is the foundation of Spark was really built in that experience because there was no job description. And the only reason why I was considering working is because I knew you and I trusted you. So like it was really from our first interaction working together is the foundation of now that we built Spark, which is no job description and about the people first. So like without knowing you or having that conversation, would have I applied for a job, a technical recruiter job at Veritech? Absolutely not. So it's kind of like we were humanizing hiring through our interaction 13 years ago, and we formalized it now and are bringing it to the masses. So it's kind of an interesting full circle story.
Yeah, almost systemizing the referral.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about this before, but before we jump into the topic today, did you see the Elon Musk mandating everybody in Tesla back to work?
I did. Yeah, he's one of my bad habits on Twitter.
What do you think? What do you think about that? And I know we're not talking about like remote work or leadership around that way, and maybe that'll be a topic for another episode. But what were your initial thoughts on that?
He doesn't surprise me anymore. He's always kind of got that shock value with all of his statements. But I mean, I would imagine he figures their brand equity strong and people will want to stay there, I guess, as opposed to leave and look for something else. I think naturally they may lose some people, whether that's followed through on or not, I guess is to remain to be seen.
I think what we will see is going forward on LinkedIn, we'll see a lot more people in their tagline, maybe ex Tesla, to add to their ex Uber, ex Apple, ex Google, ex Tesla as they move on, and that kind of kicks off the conversation that we want to chat about today. Is candidates really living in the past, and why we necessarily don't blame them is we've seen this a lot. It's kind of a trend, and Brian and I have talked about on people's LinkedIn profiles, you have like a tagline that's really kind of a personalized message of what your personal brand stands for. And we see a lot of people litter that with where they've worked before, specifically around companies that have a strong employer brand. And we're torn in terms of what we think about that. And I think really to understand where we're coming from, to tell the story of how we got into the industry and how the recruitment industry really values where you've worked. And Brian, it reminds me of, when you were mentoring me as a recruiter and we were working on OPS bids, like RFSs. And like, do you want to tell people, give them the context of what that is and like kind of how this whole movement started with us like 13 years ago?
Yeah, I guess when I think of that, and it probably was maybe the start of all this was in highly regulated environments like government, banking. Our clients ask would typically be, I need someone who's worked in the government before or in the bank before. And I think it was, I don't want to call it lazy, but I think they wanted someone who would have limited ramp up time, could come in, understands the bureaucracy and the red tape and how to move around. But I think, as much as that it may even make sense in a highly regulated environment, I think to your point, what we've seen is that bleed into more creative environments, where people are really kind of putting that, X whatever company they're at and hoping that catches them somewhere else. And I think it just kind of, it takes the creativity out of it.
Well, and don't you think like, and I can understand on the surface if it's saying like, hey, you're going to work in the government and, government's highly regulated. They have their own way of doing things and getting stuff done. So it's a very structured environment. It's easier if someone has been in there before, but it's not impossible for somebody to understand a process. So do you find that maybe the recruitment industry, in terms of how they were looking at talent, maybe overvalued the previous experience too much?
Yeah, definitely. It was, it was just the easy way out. I think sometimes when organizations are set up properly to support employees, so they bring them in, there's a bit of a feature for them to come in and learn from the best, or have a support structure instead of here's your laptop, get going kind of thing. I think that lends itself to bringing in people from different walks of life so that they can have a more diverse team and diverse perspective. I think, which is really important when you're solving problems or bringing different lessons learned. If you block yourself off to only people who've met the same challenges and problems before, you're probably going to run into a lot of the same answers.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up diversity, because I think that's a big thing, right? If I'm, a bank and I'm looking for people that have only worked at my bank or another bank to bring in, how can you really say you value diversity when you're only getting people that have worked in that environment before? And not to say that maybe they do bring some other skills, but you're really limiting the talent pool if you're placing that as the highest criteria we're looking for. And for some context, Brian and I both have been in environments where it's high level recruiting for banks, for governments, and the number one screening criteria they look for is, have they worked here before? And if they have, they get put in a bucket where now they're getting a second look. If you haven't, it's not even worth it. And maybe I'm spoiling it, but like if you're a contractor, and this relates to contractors because it's our experience, and you haven't worked in the government before, don't apply. Like chances are, like your probability of success in the government or the banks is very low in our experience of you kind of being considered versus candidates that have that experience. It's just it's a lazy filter that people do. And my long-winded question around this diversity is like that has to kill diversity, right?
Yeah, and I think, organizations are becoming more aware in how they define diversity. I think before it was very surface level, sexual orientation, race, gender, um, and now we're seeing more organizations define diversity around what type of walk of life are you coming from, what type of experience or new perspective are you bringing to the table, just to ensure that they're not creating this group think internally where everyone's kind of thinking the same way. They may look different and sound different, but they've all got the same professional experience. So I think it's really important to bring different views to the table.
And do you think that like the reason the default is to hire in that regard is just the people managers are overworked and they don't have the time to actually dedicate, or they just don't have the training to dedicate to people? Because ultimately, like if I'm hiring a recruiter, and I hire you that's done this before, I have to manage you less on what to do. And it's more, how we do it that's different. But there's less emphasis on me from a training and development perspective because you already bring skills that are easy enough to apply. So, as much as the organization may value it, to make sure that they truly value diversity and they understand what comes along with it in terms of investing in people and giving them the chance to figure it out as well.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a safe choice, and I think there's two parts to it. It's first of all the hiring manager believing in diversity in that sense, and secondly, kind of what I was saying before, the organization has to be set up structurally in a way where these people are supported. So if you're bringing in someone who doesn't have any experience or maybe just a little, or they need to be supported and insulated with a team that can help get them up to speed or train them. And so it's not every organization set up that way where they have different levels in that function. And I think when they are set up that way, it can be a great training ground. You can bring in new grads, train, I think you can't train personality or some of those skills like drive, but you can train technical skills. So I think when organizations are set up that way, it can lead to a bigger success.
Yeah, and now we're seeing this trend that we've seen back 13 years ago about, hey, if you're looking to work in the bank or the government, you have to have that previous experience because that's what we value from a recruitment industry perspective. Now, fast forward, and what we've done is we've placed such a value on some companies and their employer brands that if individuals have worked there, it all of a sudden makes them a different type of candidate, very highly sought after. And I don't want to call out companies specifically, but if you see ex Uber, ex Google, ex Amazon, ex Apple, all of the innovative, forward thinking tech companies, organizations or individuals want to attach themselves to those companies because they can assume that as their personal brand, as the employer brand, right? So we're kind of seeing that trend come alive now. And I don't know how I feel about it, man.
They don't want to let go of that X.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's interesting. They definitely tie themselves to that brand, and I think it's attractive, I guess, right? If you've come from one of these Silicon Valley companies and you've worked there, but again, it's just a lot of resume bias. I think at the end of the day, we can agree there's great employees that come from those companies, and there's employees that maybe aren't the greatest, but it's all subjective to whoever the hiring manager is. So to just think like a broad label like that means we got to hire this person. It's a little bit shoddy.
Yeah, I agree. I think like lazy recruitment is one, and like there is no such thing as the perfect candidate. Like stop there, right? Like, if you're ex Uber, ex Google, and you want to go work in the federal government, like the environment's going to be very different. Could you be successful in that? Sure. Yeah, you can, right? Like, not everybody that works in tech in a startup environment is the characteristics of that company. And the same on the other side. Not everybody that works in large organizations, government, banks, insurance companies assume the characteristics of that company. It's very individual in terms of what they've done in that environment. And I think we may have gone too far on the like what you call resume bias. And I love that because it is. I mean, not everybody that works at Uber is brilliant, right? A lot of them are. And the reason why they're working there is because of that. But we overvalue where people have worked and assume because they've worked there, they will have success anywhere. And I think that's the danger. And that's the laziness in recruiting, because you nailed it. It's like tech competencies can be taught. It's the soft skills, right? So on the flip side of that, how do you combat that in terms of when you are looking at, assessing kind of talent or looking at hiring, when you're looking at hiring for a client, evaluating skills versus experience in terms of what skills do they have to have versus where have they worked? Is that kind of something that you look at, or how do you navigate that?
I think it's defining those soft skills. Again, those are the ones that are harder to necessarily train on the job, and some of those soft skills that will lead them to be successful. Um, I think if we're just looking at past companies, we see it. We have a first row seat to this every day, because I think when we'll send resumes or candidates over to clients, on paper, they'll be like, this is the person. They look great. They worked here. They worked there. when they interview with them or when they're part of some sort of video submission, they may see them and say, "Oh, it's totally not a fit personality wise." And I think that's why we see it so much, and we see the back end of that not working out with these titles and flash and dash. So I think it's just really important to focus in on, how do these personalities gel, and what are the expectations from a soft skill perspective, and how do they measure success internally to make sure we're setting everyone up.
For sure, for sure. And Annette brings up a great question or comment here about like having key companies on your resume does help. And we're not disputing that. I completely agree. But I think, the danger is when we overvalue it and assume that that individual is that company. I think, if we're looking at, and I'll use, Amazon or Uber or one of those companies as an example, if somebody's worked there, the interview process is pretty intense. So they've made it through there. And the types of problems and challenges that Uber's solving right now give you an opportunity to solve some complex problems. So those experiences are very valuable, but it's almost like nature versus nurture environment, right? Like environment is a part of, the experience, but it's also the skills that you bring and have developed in there as well. You don't just want to make it a loose assumption that like, everybody that works there has done this. A lot of them have, but like to dig a little bit deeper instead of just a surface level brush of that, I think is the concern. But Annette, I appreciate the comment, because I do agree with you that it does help, and it does demonstrate like a lot to us, but it's not everything, is what we're saying. There should be a deeper dive than just that. It shouldn't just stop at that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't get excited when I'm speaking with a candidate who's worked at all these amazing companies, and it definitely is a table stake that helps. I think sometimes something to consider too is just the time period, or when they were at these companies, because I think, oftentimes startup companies may say like, we'd love to have someone from Amazon, and I'll say like, these are two extremely different worlds, right? So if you wanted someone early days Amazon, sure, that would be, maybe really helpful, or someone that's going to come in and maybe bring some process because they're more mature. It totally makes sense. But I think understanding the timing and the types of problems they were working on is more important than just that label alone.
Yeah. So we're saying the two should be evaluated, and considered, not just like they've worked here, therefore they are this. It's like they've worked there. Let's dig deeper and see like what they've done and when they were there, and kind of problems and skills and experiences they had there. And then we can package that up and tell the story where it's more, kind of complete at that point. And I think, the danger that I find is every candidate is unique and has a great story. Everybody's done something. Every individual has a personal brand of their own that's unique to them. And what I don't want to see happening, which is what happened to us early days, is you just overvalue where you've worked and place that as the highest importance. Tell your story. Tell something that's unique about you. Because you've worked at these places, that's great, but that's not it. There's more than that. Like, tell the story of what you did there, and kind of what you're proud of there, and like what you stand for. All of those things, I think, are really ways that you can tell a better story that's unique and personal to you, instead of just piggybacking the employer brands of where you've worked before.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think it's really important, and it definitely gets your foot in the door, right? And not saying don't go work at these great companies. Like go do it. It's amazing experience. It will definitely lead to more opportunity. But I think, like you said, I think the advice almost isn't so much to the candidates. I think it's more the hiring managers to not just ask for these labels and dig a little deeper into what we're after. And I think that's where they'll find the most success.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that back kind of full circle, because I agree with you. It's and the title of this is like, why top talents living in the past, why we don't blame them, because the reason why they are is the other side of the coin, in terms of how much it's just valued as a filtering technique. But like, so the cautionary tale is to people in a hiring position is, to understand, to your point, like, we want someone that worked at Amazon. When does it, why, like, why? Just ask why, right? And uncover that. And maybe there is, great individuals that come from Amazon, but there's also a bunch of other companies that have probably faced a similar challenge, similar scale, that bring those experiences as well. So just kind of creating a bit of a larger talent pool to draw off of, instead of being so narrow in the focus that there's only one individual that can do this. There's a lot of different people you can evaluate that can do it, and all bring different experiences and skills from different environments.
Yeah, I think that's right. When you put a filter on a process that's very impersonal, it kind of doesn't lead to great results. And I think that happens sometimes with, must have worked here, must have this many years of experience. I laughed. I saw someone who created some sort of coding the other day, and he got a job description sent to him that you need at least 5 years of this experience. He's like, well, I only created it 4 years ago. So, and it's just true that like the systemization of some of these things and the way we vet talent, I think is in some organizations, usually larger ones that are more systemized, it's outdated.
Yeah, just a little bit narrow in focus. And like, I think especially in market conditions like we have now, where, talent is, in short supply and high demand, it's almost forcing you to be a little bit more creative, and you have to expand the talent pool to look in other areas, which I think is a positive thing. And we're going to see, more innovation, more diversity in the hiring process, more so because people are forced to do it. But it's a change that should have happened without us needing it. But a lot of times we just need, help from the market to get there.
Yeah, totally agree.
Awesome, man. Well, this was fun. I'm glad we chatted and took a trip down memory lane with not only the grade 10 French class, but also, recruiting for the OPS. And if I hear skills matrix one more time or things doing that, like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm glad we're not there. And hats off to all the recruiters still fighting the good fight of getting those skills matrix in and putting together those bids. Cause it's not for us, but if it's for you, then good on you. All right, Bri. Anything to say, close out?
No, it was great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro. It's nice to get on one of these episodes. I've been bugging Mike for weeks to get on one of these posters. I'm happy I finally got accepted.
Well, I figured if as soon as you come on here, it means that like I got to share the screen the whole time, which is tough, right? So
that's it.
All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for tuning in, guys. And we'll see you next week.